The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to our webinar on the imaginative microsurvey Field Genius group codes feature. Our presenter will be Ken Fossey. He's the mobile product manager at Microsurvey. I'm James Johnston. I'm the old guy around here. I'm the training and support manager, and also my colleague Chris Clemente is joining us. Chris and I are going to be watching the chat line for questions while Ken does his presentation. So please take advantage of that chat line and send us a greeting or send us a question. At times, Ken will pause, and some of your questions we'll answer publicly. Some of them we might have to answer privately as an email follow-up. We are also going to be recording this webinar. So if you have a colleague who wanted to attend and missed it, please be sure to let them know that there's going to be a follow-up email with a link to the recording. So Ken, welcome to the webinar, and thanks for putting together this presentation. Go ahead and get started.
All right, thanks, James. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending this morning. So today what I want to do is talk about a really nice feature in Field Genius that we added a while back. And it's group codes, and it's really for efficiency in the field. So when would you consider using group codes? If you're conducting repetitive measurements, where you're going back and forth and measuring the same things over and over, you're using a subset of the points or line codes. So sometimes the point and line code list gets quite long, so searching through can take a little bit of time. If you're switching between codes on measurements, this is a quick way to switch back and forth without having to go through that search. And one other thing that we've kind of heard is because you can look at the screen, pick your codes quickly, it kind of enhances safety, especially if you're working in like traffic areas or something like that. It's easy to pick your codes, take your shot, move on. Some examples of the types of work that we can use group codes in are roads, utility surveys. If you're doing any kind of boundary survey, whether it's like property or a stream or lake or anywhere where you have that limited number of codes that you're accessing and you're just kind of cycling through them. Things like fences as well. And that's what I'm going to probably use as an example here today in setting up is setting up how we would use group codes and fences. So on the webinar today, I'm going to cover how to access the group codes, how to select a group code. You can have multiple codes, and so you can set them up for different workflows, how to access the codes or add codes to the group, how to edit and arrange them, and then select the code pattern. So we have an automatic way of cycling through the codes as you're using them, which is very useful in things like roads. And then we have two display modes. We have the map display mode, the button panel. I'll show those. And I'll also talk a little bit about setting up tolerances and things like the auto store feature for point measurements, so you can see how to set those up to really help efficiently take measurements in the field. And then I'll do a quick example of, let's say, a two-lane road. So right now, what I want to do is get out of the presentation here and look at Field Genius. So today I'm going to be running Field Genius on my laptop here, working from home like a lot of people. And I've got a simulator that we use for development that I'll be using to simulate the GNSS movement. So you'll see a little delay as I go and use that going forward. So we've got I've set up a project. I've selected a GNSS receiver. I've connected and I've set up my corrections, and I'm getting an RTK fix. So I can take a standard measurement, but what I want to do here is on the instrument panel is select the measurement button, and then out of the measurement options, select group codes. So you now see the group code icon here, and we're in the map view, and it's added a new group code line right here. And you can cycle through the different group codes right on the screen as you take your measurements. And so to configure group codes, you can go to the little settings icon here, and here's our main group code editor page. So what I wanted to start with is you have active group codes, you have a list. So we give a default list where we set up some group codes for 2-lane, 4-lane road structures, utilities. So we've got some defaults in there already that you can choose if you'd like. And you can also create a new group code, in this case, I'm going to create a group code for fence. Now, we've made it so that you don't have to enter anything from scratch. So if you've already got group codes for, let's say, a 2-lane road and you want to do something a little different, let's say you've got 2-lane and you want to measure ditches as opposed just to the asphalt, you can select an existing group code and copy that into the new one. So you're not creating everything from scratch. So that's kind of a nice feature of not having to start over. So in this case, I've created a new group code, and I've, as you can see, I've got the codes over here, but I have no codes. So what we need to do now is add the codes to the list. So if I can add a code, I can do it 2 ways. I can type in a code here and just hit OK, and it would add it to the list. The other thing I could do is use our existing Automap list and select codes from there and add codes into that permanent Automap list as I go along. So that's probably what I'm going to do, because if I'm going to go ahead and go to the effort of putting a code in, if I've got a possibility of reusing it, I really want to add it to the Automap list. So in this case, what I'm going to do is hit the list, and it brings up our Automap library. And this is the library that you set when you start your project. So you can create custom Automaps with all the different codes that you use in your company. And you can do multiple lists depending on, again, type of work you're doing, and select that when you start your project. I'm going to use just a general survey list here. And again, I'm going to start with, let's say, a fence, and let's take a look at fence post. Start with that. I've already added a couple of these in here. So if you, again, in the description, start typing, it will go to the drop down here, and you can select, description or code you want to use. And in this case, I've put in, post metal, post wood. I'm going to say, okay, I want to measure a wooden post. I select that as the one I want, and it's now added it to the active group fence. It's brought it up, the code, and it's got a couple settings associated with that code. So for posts, we don't want a line attached to the different posts. They're unique elements, so we don't want lines connecting the measured points. So I'm just going to leave that option as no line and hit OK. And as you can see, we've added the code to the list. So I'm going to add a couple other codes, and you'll see that this goes pretty quick if you type things properly. Add metal post. So again, we'll set a fence. We're going to add a wooden fence. let's add a chain link fence. And finally, let's add maybe a gate. A gate post. And so in this case, as you see, I want to add the gate itself to our list, and I'm going to add it to the Automap library. So when you add something to the Automap library, you can set a bunch of settings, and we can do this, of course, with any code we want to add in. So I set up gate as the code, and also I'm just going to leave that as the summary. I can select the symbol I want for that gate. So we're going to use a point symbol that'll show up on the map. Leave the default size. I'm going to leave the color the same, black for good contrast. And the other thing you can do is you can add it to a layer. So in our Automap library, again, if we are wanting to export things that we measure back into CAD programs, when you set up your codes, it's possible to actually add them to different layers so that when you import them into the CAD program, they all come in as layers and just more efficient. You'd have to coordinate with the office on kind of what codes should go to what layer and how you want to work with it in the CAD program. And the other thing you can do is you can set a default here. Is I'm going to want to set it up so that when I record it, the default is it's going to be aligned. So as I go along and create a gate, it's going to 2 points, the start and the end of the gate, I'm going to have a line associated with that. And assign to the digital terrain model. In this case, I'm just going to leave that off and select OK. So we've now added that to our Automap library, and I'm going to add it to the fence group. So there we go. I've created a group of codes that I want to use with my fence group. So the next thing is I've added all these. When you go in the field, you can also say, okay, I'm going to be working on a wooden fence, so I'm not going to have any metal posts. So I really, in this case, I don't really want them. So I'm going to have wooden posts, a wooden fence. I'm going to probably have gate posts and the gate. So those are going to be kind of the top choices that I want to use. So it's pretty easy to edit and adjust your codes out in the field before you get to use them. So even you can have this list be quite a common list, and then you can either rearrange it so the ones you're using come at the top of the list, or if you need to, you can decide and edit the list. And for example, I'm going to remove the post metal out of there and trim your list back. So we've created our codes and selected our group code. So I'm going to hit OK here. And now we're back into the map view. And as you can see, we've got our codes here. And I'm going to select the gate post and take a measurement. So I've got my first gate post. And one of the things you see is that I had this highlighted, and it moved to the next item in the list. So again, in settings, we have something called pattern here. So once you've set up your group codes, you can actually select and order them in the list. You can actually select a pattern to move through the codes as you use them. This is particularly good for like road work, where you're walking across a road, going up, coming back. And I'll kind of show that in an example. that we do. So you can do kind of a zigzag sample of how you would plan to measure all the points in your group, right to left, left to right, or select no pattern, where you just select what you want. So in this case, I've added no pattern, and I'm going to, although I've got the post in there, I'm going to add a gate point, and then I'm going to walk over about 10 meters in this case, and select another measurement, trigger it, and I've got my gate. And maybe put a gate post at that same point, so the gate's attached to the gate post. Let me cancel this. With our simulator, sometimes we get a little issue with it going back and forth on the movement. So let me just see if it'll respond for me. If not, I may have to, oh, it did. There we go. Okay, that's just an issue with our simulator community cross on the computer. So now what I want to do is, I've done the post, and I want to go ahead and measure my fence. And one of the things I did, I switched from the gate post to the fence, and I didn't start the fence line from actually the end of the gate post here. So I can go back and fix that in the edit easily, and I'll do that in a little while. But what I'm going to do here is move on to maybe taking the fence at a corner here and just going up and taking another measurement. Moving north along the fence, taking measurements. So as you see, it's easy to go back and forth between what you want to do here and choose the codes quickly on the ones that you're going to use. So to get out of the group code screen there, we can just hit the exit there. And again, you know, I talked about wanting to select a line and close this out. So what I want to do is draw the line back to the point I missed. So again, in Field Genius, it's really easy to edit things in the field, adjust your line work, and so on. So you know, there's an example of how to use the lines. Another way to do this too is you can see this in the map view as you go forward. There's another view that you can see using group codes, and that's the button display or the button panel. So again, if you know what you're doing and you don't need to see it on the map, then what you can do is get the panel and get a listing of 12 of the codes that you want to select from. And then it's easy to select a code from the panel without having to scroll. It's just a one tap as opposed to maybe scrolling back and forth, and select your measurement. So we find this is, you know, can be particularly good for things like utilities. So if I switch to my utilities group codes, and I'm just going to move maybe a little bit north here of what I was doing, and I'm going to switch to the button panel. So now we have a choice of different utility options for the group codes. And again, if you're out, again, if it's roads or you're walking around in traveled areas, having this on the screen, you're not looking and searching for everything. You can really just go and say, okay, I'm at a hydrant, take a measurement. Done. Walk along and get to the next thing, and maybe it's a sign, take a measurement. So again, the group codes, it's just efficiency in the field, a subset of the codes that you're working with that day with your workflow. And so you can go along and take different measurements. In this case, we'll do a lamp measurement. And then if you want to see how things are on the screen, you can just go out, go back to the map mode and see where everything is. So that's, again, a pretty good example of when you might be using just the group code panel. If you're not connecting lines, if you're just taking individual measurements of features, that can be a good example. So what I would like to do now is maybe just move up here a little bit, and I'll adjust the screen so we can see where we're at and use the road example. So I'm setting a group code for a 2-lane road, and we've got edge of asphalt, the fog line, the center line, the fog line, edge of asphalt. And in this case, I'm going to set my pattern to be the back and forth pattern. And for all of these, we're measuring lines. So again, you're doing a road and you want to connect these lines. So we're starting with the edge of asphalt. I'll take the first measurement. I'm just going to move and walk to the fog line. It automatically went to the fog line. I'll take a measurement. Keep walking. Center line. Keep walking. Other fog line. And edge of asphalt again. So we've got our first set of measurements here. We've gone across the road. We've done all our measurements. Now we're going to go up 20, 30 meters, and we're going to want to repeat this. So what I'm doing now is taking the measurement up here on the edge of pavement again. And as you can see, since we have the lines connected in our group codes, it's going to individually map the lines to each code as we go across. So again, efficiency, it's really, once you have this set up, you have your pattern and codes established, you've got them in the right order in your group code manager, and you're out in the field, it's really quite simple to just walk your pattern, take your measurements. All right. So that's kind of the demonstration of group codes, how we set them up, the ability to establish these, create new ones, set different groups, for your workflow. When you've gone to the effort of saving them, the other thing you can do is save all the defaults. So on your controller, if you've created a new group, you can save it, and the next project you open, that group will be available to you. So you're not having to recreate it all the time. I think the last thing I want to show is just if we look at doing this and the efficiency of doing this and going out and taking your measurements and having everything kind of set up to do repetitive measurements, sometimes it's nice. We do have Field Genius set up in our sensor configure, so you can set your different tolerances. And I did that a little quick, but you can set, if you go to your settings here from the map view, you can hit sensor configure, and you have your different tolerances. And if you, in this case, I'm using the RTK fixed tolerance. And one of the things is at the bottom, you have actions. And so what I have set is I'm doing the auto skip measure status. I had that on and the auto store measurement screen on. That allowed me to just take the shot and keep moving. If you want to review your shots as you go along, you can set those tolerances. And then it allows you to, take your shot, but then you can review your standard deviations. You can review northing, easting, antenna height. Review those screens before saving the shot. So again, that's just a trick. If you're satisfied and know what you're doing and your connection's good, you can monitor your PDOT as you go along, or you can also use the page button or the drop down here, looking at your northings and eastings, your standard deviations here as you go along in the map view. So just a couple different configurations to help you in the field with using group codes to speed the work. So that is pretty much what I want to cover with group codes today. I'll see if there's any questions, James, that have come in that I might be able to answer.
Hi, Ken. I love watching people demonstrate that feature. It is just slick. I know you have fun putting it together.
Yeah.
There's only one question, and actually two people asked it, and it was they are curious if Field Genius supports tilt correction, and specifically tilt correction with IMUs.
Yes, a very timely question. We work with our OEM partners on this, and we do support tilt correction. The first one that came out was Leica on their GS18 about a year ago. We added support for that at that time, and lately we've added support for a number of our partners. South, StoneX, CHC have all come out with new devices that use the IMU tilt correction. We've added those into our Field Genius for Windows product in the last release, 10.4. iGauge, and there's a couple others. There's one I'm missing. I apologize off the top of my head. But we do have support for that end. We've always supported the tilt measurement with a number of instruments that had the magnetic and the inclinometer in the past. But a lot of our partners are going to IMU. We're also in the midst right now of adding support for the IMU tilt correction into our Field Genius for Android product. That'll be in our 1.5 release that's coming out shortly. We're just in the last stages of testing tilt, adding it into Field Genius for Android. So we do support the new IMU technology with our partners. I imagine as different devices come out, we will be adding that support in for more devices as our OEM partners bring those to market.
Great, thanks, Ken. Thanks again for your presentation and putting this together. I can tell from the audience that they were paying lots of attention. Thank you to those of you who asked questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if we have some, or actually I think there's a few private questions here, and we'll get back to you by email. And if you have a colleague that you know was going to attend and didn't make it, we'll be following up with an email with a link to the video And we'll also post the video on our YouTube channel. So thank you to everybody for attending. Thanks again, Ken, for presenting, and goodbye to everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.